Good morning and welcome to our webinar on finding your COVID-19 superpower, key principles for thriving amid disruption with Professor Michael Wade. We hope that you and your family are safe and well at this time. And we thank you for all of the efforts that you are making on behalf of your organizations, to keep us going during this time. So this is a part of a broader series we are conducting on the theme of virtual uncertainty, or how to manage the twin crises of virtual work created by COVID-19 and economic uncertainty. So at ExecOnline, we believe that this is the key management challenge of the moment. And you can find more information at our website, execonline.com/virtual uncertainty. In addition to today's webinar, we have two upcoming webinars with some of the great business thinkers of our time. On Thursday, we will be hosting Michael Chavez, the CEO of Duke Corporate Education. Michael will be discussing resilience during this time of crisis. And next week, August 29th, we will be hosting Rita McGrath to talk about the future of work and competitive advantage after COVID-19. All of the webinars we are providing, including this one, are also offered on demand, and recordings are available on the website for you to share. So just one quick word about ExecOnline for those wondering who we might be if you're unfamiliar with us currently. We are an online leadership development company that works with the best business schools in the world to bring measurable and impactful online development to your critical middle, the manager, VP, director level individuals within the organization. And we are really a company that has brought the 70-20-10 of learning online through the project-based approach that we have. Now for some quick introductions. My name is Adam Briniger. I lead our client solutions team at ExecOnline and will be moderating the event today. The star of our show is Michael Wade. Michael is the Cisco Chair in Digital Business Transformation and a Professor of Innovation and Strategy at IMD Business School. He is the Director of the Global Center for Digital Business Transformation, an IMD and Cisco initiative. Michael as well leads the Driving Digital Transformation program offered by ExecOnline 5 times a year. Michael is a noted expert. He has more than 100 articles and presentations to his credit in leading academic journals and conferences, has written 7 books and more than 20 case studies based on his experience working with organizations. He leads a number of programs at IMD. The Swiss newspapers in 2016 and 2017 named him one of the country's top 10 digital thought leaders. And he has worked with many of the world's biggest organizations in consulting capacity and building learning journeys for them as well. He is coming to you from Switzerland. I am coming to you from my home office, here in Maryland, as we all adjust to working from home. So, with all of that said, welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Adam, and hello to everyone. Good morning, or if you happen, like me, to be in Europe at the moment, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you to talk about this very important topic. So I guess the world has changed for many of us, and in ways that have been relatively hard to predict. So what I really want to spend the time that we have today is talking about how to respond to what's happened at the moment, and how to find your COVID-19 superpower. At the beginning of this crisis, and of course, we're quite far into it here in Europe, really the initial response was a reaction. There's so many things to take care of right away initially, that companies, that management teams, that managers and executives have really been in kind of reactive mode, just taking care of the basics, helping people to work from home, making sure the supply chains were fixed and so forth. And I think that's taken almost all of people's time. But as time has passed, many companies, at least the ones that I work with, are starting to turn their attention now to thinking about being proactive. But it's not that easy. I mean, everybody knows that we should be thinking ahead. We all know that the normal after this thing dies down is not going to be the same as the old normal. It's going to be new, but we don't really know what it's going to look like. And we don't really have much in the way to learn from. And there's no playbook here about how to come back from a crisis like this one. The last time we saw a big pandemic of this size was 100 years ago. And so we're really flying blind. And to make matters worse, we want to get information. And when we look out at the information that we get from the media, I kind of think of it in a way like fast food. You know, there's a lot of information, it's cheap or free, it's generally over-processed, probably unhealthy, but strangely addictive. So we're trying to be proactive, and we don't have very stable, good quality information to draw on. But I think when it comes down to it, and all the organizations represented today on the webinar really fall into three different categories. There's the losers, there's the winners, and then there's this third category, this in-betweener category. So let's spend a little bit of time looking at these three categories. So the first category is the losers, and these are companies and industries that, you know, I just got to feel bad for you. You know, you just basically woke up one day and this thing hit. You know, there was really no way you could prepare for it. You're on the wrong side of history. I mean, if you're an airline today, it's tough. You know, it's not easy. If you're in tourism, if you're in investment banking, if you're in large scale entertainment, you know, this is not an easy place to be. If you're shopping, you know, running shopping centers or anything like that, this is really difficult through basically no fault of your own. And we've seen some crazy stuff. We're continuing to see some crazy stuff. Last night, the oil price went negative, which is a really bizarre concept. I mean, what does that actually mean? Does it mean if you go to fill up your car, they pay you to fill it up? The airlines are getting hit massively. We're seeing the very beginnings of bankruptcies that are happening in that sector. So there's a group of companies and industries that are in this loser category. But then there's also the winners, and I'm going to ask you in a few minutes which category you think you are in. You as a company, not you as an individual. You're all winners, of course. But from the company standpoint, there are also winners. You know, the sectors and companies that are just lucky. You know, the serendipity. They happen to be on the right side of history. You know, if you're an e-commerce company, if you're creating video conferencing software, pharma, gaming. I mean, these are all industries and companies that are doing extremely well at the moment. But then there's this interesting third category that I call the in-betweener category. And these are companies and industries where it could go either way. They could come out of this doing really, really well, or they could come out of it not doing well at all. And decisions that they're making today, right now, this month, this week, today, will impact whether they exit this crisis as a winner or a loser. And I think a lot of big industries fit into this category of in-betweeners. You know, manufacturing, I think a lot of retail, non-grocery retail, banking, financial services, government, I think education. A lot of these industries really will be impacted massively, and decisions they make now will impact how they perform. So let me ask you a question, and this is, you're going to see on your screen a little pop-up with a poll, and it's just one of two answers. Imagine that you are a movie studio and that you plan to release a blockbuster movie in this quarter. What do? Imagine if it's Memorial Day weekend or something like that, a big blockbuster. You spend a lot of time, energy, and money. And what do? So the first choice is you postpone it until movie theaters are open again. The second choice is you release it via another channel. So this is the choice that you have. Let's see what your choice is. Just pick one of these two.
Yeah, so in terms of the results, we have 9% say postpone it until movie theaters open again, and 91% say release it via another channel.
Okay, so we have 9% versus 91%, which is not particularly close. Then it's quite interesting to see in that case that almost all of the big movie studios have chosen the one that you didn't choose, the 9% option. Almost all of them have chosen to delay the release of their blockbuster movies until later in the year. And of course, this is in many ways, the obvious decision. probably the least risky decision. You know, nobody's going to movie theaters now, but they will go again in the future. So you release it at the time when people are going again. But there's also risks with this approach, as you can imagine. You know, all these movies are being released, being postponed. They're going to be released all around the same time. It's going to be very difficult to differentiate your movie from all the others. Very few of them, in fact, chose the option that most of you chose, 91% of you, which was to release the movies now, but on other channels. The one exception, at least in the North American market, is NBC Universal, which has decided to release some of its movies today on other channels and charge for them. They did this with a movie called Trolls World Tour. I have to admit I haven't seen it, but it is available right now. And they did it also with another thriller called Invisible Man. And what they found actually is that, at least with Invisible Man, where we have some data, it cost $7 million to make, and it's so far returned more than $120 million. So it's a kind of a gutsy move. It hadn't been done before. It was not a common move within the industry, but it seems to have paid some dividends. So the companies that are showing some kind of innovation or some courage, making courageous decisions, some of them are seeing benefits. Let me actually share with you an example that was from China. And this is kind of another example of a movie studio that created a movie, but this was even harder, because in the Chinese New Year, which is always toward the end of January or in early February every year, it's a big deal in China, and people watch movies. It's a big thing to do, is to watch movies. So movies are created actually for this event. So then the decision gets even more difficult, because if you delay the opening, it's no longer relevant because it's no longer New Year. But this was exactly the time when COVID-19 was starting to hit in China. And in fact, 2 days before the New Year's celebration, all the movie theaters were mandated to close throughout the country. So suddenly now you're ready to go in the next 2 days, and the movie theaters are closed. So what do you do? And all of the big studios delayed except one. And this one studio decided they were going to release it through a streaming channel, but then they had to decide, well, they didn't have a channel, so what channel were they going to use? And they approached a company called ByteDance. Now, some of you may know ByteDance because it's the parent company of TikTok. And TikTok is an extremely popular, and its Chinese equivalent, a popular streaming platform. Extremely popular, but it's popular for user-generated content with videos that are no longer than 15 seconds each. Within 1 day, the two came to an agreement, the two organizations, the movie studio and ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, to release the movie on all ByteDance's online platforms, including TikTok. So this was actually a big risky decision on both sides. The movie theater not going through, the movie studio not going through theaters, and also the platform changing its model from user-generated short-form content to scripted long-form content. But the result was extremely popular. And it's a little bit the same with NBC Universal in the Western world as well. And people are sitting at home, they got nothing to do, they're tired of watching Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever, and they're willing to pay for interesting new content. So I guess now is the time I'm going to ask you, and we're going to have another poll here. And which of these categories do you think that your organization fits? Would you categorize your organization in the loser category, the winner category, the in-betweener category, or would you say 4 is all of the above, that you fit in all of the above? So we're going to open up the poll again. We're going to give you a chance to vote and see where we come out as far as the proportion of you that fit into each of these categories.
Okay, so which category does your organization fit into? The losers, 9%, the winners, 33%, the in-betweeners, 43%, and then all of the above, 16%.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. So for the winners, the 1/3 of you who categorized as winners, congratulations, well done. You're on the right side of history. For the losers, I feel sorry for you. 9% of you, things will get better if you survive that long. And for the rest of you, it really, a lot depends on how you react now. In fact, I'm going to present to you 3 response approaches, and each of these response approaches actually can be used depending on the category that you fit into. So the first response, proactive response strategy to COVID-19 is something I call same products, different channel. This is particularly relevant if you're an in-betweener, if you're in the in-betweener category, and also if you're in the winner category. Here the idea is, you're selling something, see if you can go and succeed in selling that thing, product or service, through a different channel. The most obvious one is taking offline to online. But frankly, just doing it, taking a product and then putting it on an e-commerce website is not very exciting, not very interesting. So the organizations that are doing this most effectively, we see, have some kind of a twist to it. So we see Nike here that had to close all of its stores in China and has now closed them through many other parts of the world, including almost all of Europe, is moving activity online. But in order to promote its products online, it's also offering services. So they have Nike has a kind of an exercise, a professionally curated exercise program that is now offering for free. You used to have to pay for it, and now they're offering it for free to kind of generate interest and dynamism into the brand. And also they're actively offering special promotions when you go online. So either the products themselves are reduced in price, or they're offering a free shipping and so forth. So I think that's the most obvious one, which is going offline to online. But then there's some other types of strategies which are a little less obvious. Here's another one that's really taking off in China. And you remember China are a few months ahead of us when it comes to dealing with shutdowns. And this is live commerce. And live commerce is really, I guess it's a fresh twist on the old infomercial. As some of you might remember, I mean, they're still out there, the heyday of the 70s and 80s, these infomercials. So now the Chinese have kind of redeveloped this idea of an infomercial into something they call live commerce, which is where products are actually being demoed live online. So you can go there, you can watch the products being demoed, and they're being demoed by celebrities. So earlier this year, Kim Kardashian West was selling some of her products through in China through a live commerce channel. So they use celebrities, but now this has become so popular in the Chinese market that actually the people doing the live commerce have become celebrities in and of themselves. So hundreds of thousands of people, in some cases millions of people, will log on to watch one of these live commerce events, and they sell tons and tons of products. So it's a way to kind of liven the online experience and make it a little less dull and boring. And let's face it, let's be honest. I mean, most e-commerce is pretty boring. We see education moving online, mostly because they don't have a choice, and some of them are doing it much better than others. Of course, ExecOnline is an organization which has really been doing this from the beginning. And we see other organizations trying to catch up. Schools, many of you have kids now who are learning online, or either through high school or university or college. And you'll see there's a huge variance in the quality of the education they get through these online channels. But that's certainly, moving offline to online services is a big trend. And then we see, some kind of creative approaches out there to try and take offline services online. And one is getting a haircut. I don't know if any of you are in the position where you could really use a haircut. I mean, in Europe where I am, we've been in the lockdown for about 5 weeks. So people are getting pretty desperate. So now there are sites out there where you can get linked to a professional hairstylist or barber. And so you cut your own hair, but they walk you through the process. So this is kind of an interesting way to take, even though they can't cut hair, they can help you cut your own hair. So we see quotes like this: "I love my boyfriend, but he looked hideous. You saved my life." So there's a little bit of creativity there. We also see musicians. Of course, nobody's going to see musicians these days are creating custom songs and messages for people for birthdays or anniversaries you can get now online. But it doesn't always have to be offline to online. There are other channels that you can also look at to try and pursue and sell your products and services. In this case, in one example, in Russia, they are building and installing vending machines very close to large apartment buildings. This solves two problems. The first problem is the touch problem, or the physical proximity, because it's a vending machine. And the second thing is you avoid the big lineups that we're often seeing these days in supermarkets. So it's really offline to offline, but a different type of offline. Another example here, some of you may have gone to escape rooms, which is essentially an offline service. No one's going to those anymore. So some of the escape rooms are actually creating home packs that they get mailed to your home, and you can actually enjoy some form of an escape room experience, but in your own home. So it's offline to offline services through creating these home experiences. So if you're going to look for this response strategy, really the key questions that you need to ask yourself at first is, can we sell our products and services online? But the second one is, beyond the online channel, are there other channels where we could use to sell our products and services? And then finally, the third question, how do our products and services need to be adapted to create value through this new channel? It's very rare that the same product or service can just be taken from one channel and just dropped into another channel and be successful. So what are the adaptations that need to be made is another key question. All right, so let's go to the second proactive response strategy. This is where you have the same infrastructure, but different products. This is one especially for the losers among you, and also for the in-betweeners. The most common example we see of this response strategy today, and we see it all over the place, is organizations, companies developing medical or health products or services linked to the virus. So huge number of examples of this. We see, big manufacturing companies, so Ford, Tesla, GM, BYD, and others changing production to produce PPEs, face masks, ventilators, and so forth. You see other organizations switching production like LVMH to produce hand sanitizers. You see new products on the market to test physical distance, so you can make sure that you're at that 6 feet or 2 meter distance from the next person. We see examples of apps being developed. An interesting case is Apple and Google, really big competitors typically, but working together to create apps to track the coronavirus. We see hotels, which are empty in many cases, using their infrastructure for medical workers. And finally, you see kind of funky examples like this one on the bottom right here, where you have a tobacco company working on creating a virus. Sorry, not a virus, a vaccine. Big difference there. A tobacco company using its technology to create a vaccine. So that's kind of the most obvious one, but there are also other examples that are less obvious. One example that we see, because you can't go to see movies in a movie theater, but you can sit in your car. So we're seeing a kind of resurgence of drive-in movies in different parts of the world. We're seeing restaurants and cafes and so forth becoming grocery stores. So Panera Bread is now selling products through its outlets that are actually would normally be sold in grocery stores. So this is using their infrastructure for a different type of product. And then you kind of have goofy examples, in Oregon, a strip club now, you can actually get your food delivered by a strip. Well, let's move on from that one. But the idea is that these organizations are trying to be creative in how they're delivering their products and services. Another interesting example along the same line that you can think about potentially taking advantage of is resource or labor arbitrage. We see in Europe, this is happening quite a bit. For example, in Germany, McDonald's, the restaurants are closed. So the workers don't have no work to do, but Aldi and other supermarkets are super busy. So McDonald's employees are actually working in supermarkets. We see a couple of examples in Scandinavia of the airlines that are basically grounded. SAS is one of the airlines, and many of the people who work for the SAS airline are actually trained in first aid. So they're actually being used in hospitals and clinics. And then we see an example in Finland where Finnair employees are helping with children to do their schoolwork online. And there's another example that's actually based in the US, powered, set up by Accenture, which is a kind of a work sharing, employee sharing plan that includes a number of very large organizations like Cargill, Frito-Lay, Walmart, Baxter, and so forth, to share employees where there's a lot of slack and a lot of need. So the questions to ask yourself along this response strategy are really these: can we use our existing infrastructure to create medical or health products that are in demand? But then also, what about, you know, the products or services that are not directly health or medical related? Can we use our existing infrastructure to create those? They may be in demand as well. Can we lease our existing infrastructure to others during the crisis, so we don't need the infrastructure, but they do? And then again, like the first response strategy, the question about adjustment: how do we need to adjust our infrastructure to create these products and services? And finally, is there a way we can work with a partner to do this more effectively? So we get to the final third proactive response strategy. This is really focused on the winners, but also on the in-betweeners. This is the same products, different infrastructure. In this case, you have a product or a service which is doing really well and you cannot meet demand. Demand is so high that you have a hard time meeting it. So of course, the most obvious strategy, I suppose, being used by a number of these organizations, if you're in the winner side, is you're massively hiring. We talked about Amazon earlier, hiring more than 100,000 people. Walmart is the same case, you're hiring 150,000 and more people to try and meet the demand. So expansion of capacity through hiring. You could also do it through partnering. In this particular case, Amazon and Lyft are working together. Nobody's taking rides, so the Lyft drivers are not doing anything, so they're actually being used by Amazon in warehouses and for deliveries. You could have expansion of capacity through diversion of resources. This is happening with Amazon again, with Whole Foods. They're actually restricting the opening hours of the supermarkets so that the people in the supermarkets can help with the online delivery. As in many parts of the world today, and maybe it's the same case with you, it's very difficult to get a slot for delivering online groceries. So actually diverting resources from the physical store into the online environment. And then finally, the last strategy, which is kind of a weird one, is to expand your capacity by actually reducing quality. If you reduce quality, you can produce more. An example of this we've seen is with the online delivery of content. All the big players, Apple, Netflix, Disney, YouTube, and so forth, are actually reducing the quality of their streaming in order to allow for more better capacity and more streaming to happen. So the key questions to ask in this case are: how can we expand our production delivery capacity? Can we do it through hiring additional people or resources, to working with partners? Can we do it by diverting resources to in-demand areas? Or can we do it by reducing quality? So let me pause there and see if you have any questions, and I'll be pleased to answer those if I can. What you see on the slide here is a decision tree, which helps you think through these different options. The very top of the decision, are you struggling in your business because of COVID-19? Yes or no. If you are, can you use another channel for your products and services? If you can, absolutely do it as we described. If you can't, the next question is, well, can you use your infrastructure to produce products or services that are in demand? If you can do, yes, absolutely do it. If not, really, you're left with the only choice left, which is focusing on loss mitigation. If the answer is no, that you're not struggling, can you acquire additional infrastructure to expand production? If you can, yes, then absolutely do it. And if you can't do that, then continue to operate as normal, but really keep an eye out for exploring new developing opportunities. All right, why don't I pause there, leave it there, and open the floor up. If there's any questions from you, I guess you can write those questions in the chat window, and I'll do my best to answer them.
And so, Michael, I think we've got a question, just about I think it kind of goes back to your point around movies and sort of thinking about delay or postpone or not postpone. And so this question is we can bring our services online, but I don't think the economics of online will ever be as good for us. So do we just need to accept that and invest, sort of heavily in it, or should we bank on a return to in-person? Like, how do what are some thoughts about how to kind of game plan? Or, you had sort of said, as you think about the movie piece, it's interesting that the folks on the line had a very different sense of what the movie industry should do. But how do you think about that postpone or kind of adapt, especially when the economics are just not favorable for adaptation?
And that's often the case from the movement from offline to online. Often that's the case, is that the profitability is not the same. You hope to make that up in volume, but that's of course hard to do. I think the answer to that question, Adam, and those of you who asked it, really depends a lot on the sector that you're in. Some sectors, I think things will go to more or less back to the way they were before the crisis, and in that case, it may make sense to sort of ride it out, right, rather than making big investments in other channels. But in many cases, that's just not true. That as people interact more online, they get more used to it, they get more comfortable with it. And so the normal becomes a little bit different. And if you haven't invested during this time and then you have to play catch up later, it's going to be extremely difficult to do that. And if you see that the organizations that have managed to do that often have to make those really, really difficult choices by accepting lower margins or investing in new capabilities at the very time when they're struggling so much in their core business. So it's certainly not easy, but I would say if you're in the loser category, a very legitimate strategy is just to batten down the hatches, close things down as much as you can, apply for government support, and wait it out. But if you're in that in-betweener category, I would say that's a dangerous strategy. So yep. You want to think I'm not saying you should do it or not, depends on your situation. I would take it think about it very seriously. And even if the economics don't look great, in the future, it might be a very smart strategic move.
Great, thank you, Michael. So we got some more questions coming in. This one from Erica. So Erica asks, are there a couple of examples of companies innovating that just really stand out?
So we're looking for those examples all the time. And I think a lot of them you actually see by looking east. In China, you see quite a few examples of companies that have really stood out within the crowd. I've given you already a couple of examples, but you see, a big insurance company in China called Ant Financial started offering a COVID-19 medical insurance, which sounds like a really crazy, stupid thing to do, but they got so much new business from that, and so much positive press from that they actually increased their market share quite significantly. So there's a few examples like that that you can see. I know, unfortunately, most companies, because they've been so focused on the reactive side, haven't really been very innovative in how they've responded to this crisis. I think you see, in the education space, my space, you see a big difference between certain players. Certain players who had started to invest already were really prepared and moved forward very quickly, whereas many others are just struggling to even the most basic type of online learning. So I gave some examples in the presentation that I thought were interesting and innovative, but they're not that easy to find, Erica, unfortunately.
So I think that actually transitions very nicely to a question that we get from Candace, and so Candace is asking, just for some suggestions for how to handle that transition from that COVID, short-term effort to changing to a more long-term, kind of strategy. And as she's asking the question, I can kind of think about how, I mean, it is a difficult mindset shift that you're talking about, across this presentation.
It is, and it's always going to be difficult to get the attention of the key leaders on something that's forward-looking and proactive, because there's just so many things to take care of right now, and so many threats and so many risks, that something, Candice, that I would just very practically is that when you're having meetings with people to talk about what to do, that you explicitly put aside a certain amount of time to talk about proactive stuff that's more creative, more innovative. Because if you don't do that, your agenda will just be full of all the millions of things that need to be taken care of today. So maybe you have a 90-minute meeting, you set up the last 20 minutes or even 30 minutes to talk about proactive opportunities rather than just reactive threats.
Great. And so we've got a question from Richard now, around, are you aware of any examples of themed attractions offering a product or service, a VR room or other during this period of shelter in place? Very specific question. I don't know, Michael, if any of that has surfaced in your research so far.
So it hasn't, but whenever I hear a question that specific, what it usually means, Adam, is the person who asked the question actually has a good example in mind. So could we, Adam, maybe go back to what was the name of that person who asked that question?
That was Richard.
Richard. Okay, Richard, I give you my permission to unmute your microphone, and just if you have a thought or comment or reflection about that particular question, I'm gonna reflect it back to you.
Okay, thank you. Not actually, I don't. That's why I was curious. What I do know is that some themed attractions which have closed, I'm based in Orlando, Florida, which is a lot of themed attractions, are putting some of their businesses online, notably retail, getting a little bit of success, but they're experimenting with, could they take a VR experience in their theme park and sell it through Zoom, or I don't know if it's Zoom, but sell it through some other means.
I mean, and I would say, Richard, there's such a good example of potential. If basically it's the same product, different infrastructure, right? It's that response strategy. If a themed attraction can find a way to simulate the experience that somebody would have going to a theme park at home, I mean, that's a captive market, and people are sitting at home, they're bored. I mean, this is like the example I gave of the escape rooms. If they can somehow find a way to recreate, even at some level, that experience online, that's a great opportunity at the moment.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thanks, Richard.
Great. And so we have another question from, and I apologies if I get the name right here, but Al-Mutassim. Is there any way to make a feasibility study for our choices before we risk it? So how to think about how feasible it is to do one of these proactive responses.
Right. I mean, that's also a good question. The answer is yes and no. In the traditional feasibility study, it's very difficult because we don't have a precedent. here. We don't have a lot of history to learn from. So the assumptions you're basing your feasibility study on they're hard to make because we really don't know how this is going to play out. But that doesn't mean you can't experiment. So I would say this is a very good example to experiment with different types of strategies quickly and cheaply, and then see how they work. And if they work well, you can invest more. So I'd say rather than come up with a feasibility study which is based on sometimes pretty shaky assumptions, that you actually just go ahead and test, create small prototypes and see how things work.
Thank you. I think that, yeah, that's a really fascinating question and a great response. We're in an experimental, kind of moment. So a question from Laurent: if you have some cash on hand, how do you decide if you should weather the storm and wait or change your business model now? So it goes back to this question that I think kind of keeps rearing, which is sort of like, how do you think about whether we really need to do this or whether we can kind of ride out the storm? And for companies that have cash, it's obviously a little different than organizations that don't have that cash. So that's from Laurent.
And again, I think it's a great question. I think it depends which category you're in. If you're in the loser category, you hold on to it as much as you can, and maybe some targeted experiments. But basically, you're trying to weather the storm. When it come out of it, you have some capital then to expand. If you're in the winner category, you use it to expand your capacity. But then if you're in that in-betweener category, that's where it gets more interesting. That you probably do want to use some of that free cash flow, and of course not putting yourself out of business, but you do want to use some of that free cash flow to try and experiment with new types of business models, new types of approaches, new channels, as I talked about, using your infrastructure in new ways, producing new products, those types of things. I think today is a really, really good time to experiment. We have, generally speaking, long periods of relative stability and then short periods of huge variability, and we're in one of those right now. So there's threats certainly, but there's also great opportunities. The decisions that you make today can have big impacts of how it plays out in the next round of stability.
Great. So a question from Clifford. What are some innovative best practices to enhance participant engagement and reduce participant multitasking during online training? So this is an online training, question. We obviously have a lot of L&D folks on the line as well who are thinking quite a bit about taking their own services online and how to be successful with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I work for a business school, so a lot of our programs are going online in one form or another. Many of them in formats like this with live webinars. And it's harder than it is in a physical room. As you know, when you're in a room, you kind of got people captive. They're there. So it's getting their attention and keeping their attention is not that hard. Doing it online is trickier. I think a couple of things that we've learned on that. The first one, a very basic one, and we're actually not following it today, is to have everybody turn their video on. So if everybody has their video on, you can see people, which increases engagement, but they can also see you. So that also gives you a little bit more of that incentive to pay attention and participate. I think another element to make live webinars more engaging is to use virtual breakout sessions. Now, this is something that ExecOnline has done for many years, and I think others are learning the value of these. Unfortunately, not all video conferencing software supports virtual breakout sessions. So for the moment, Skype for Business, Teams, Adobe Connect, WebEx have very limited virtual breakout capabilities. Zoom is about the only one, as well as BlueJeans, that does it really well. But the benefit of a virtual breakout session is you're not one of 50 or 100 or 200. You're one of 5. And you can really, you can engage a lot better when it's a small number of people. So I always encourage, if you want to get engagement, include some kind of small factor discussion time, virtual breakouts, or virtual buzz groups into a session. And I think the engagement tends to be a lot higher. Of course, it also helps to have multi-mode. So you're using the chat window, you're having people jump in with comments as much as possible. You're switching focus, so you have polls. And I think the more you can do that, the better the engagement.
Great, thank you, Michael. Please keep the questions coming in the chat box. We have another one coming in from Lino. In regards to manufacturing, where there's much close proximity during different phases of production, how do you believe companies can innovate their ability to produce if social distancing and high risk of proximity is prevalent? Note you're a critical business supporting infrastructure, everywhere. Any thoughts on that, Michael?
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of manufacturing innovation over the last couple of decades has really been around productivity and efficiency improvements. So making things tighter, the timelines and just in time, and supply chains being highly integrated so there's no waste. Waste is bad. And then what we realized from this crisis is actually a little bit of waste is good. Slack is good, because if your supply chain, if your manufacturing operation, if your production lines are super efficient and tightly coupled, you have a problem somewhere, it shuts everything down. So I think there's a general interest in revisiting this idea of slack and waste, and maybe a little bit of slack is not such a bad thing. Of course, automation, to answer your question directly, automation helps because you don't need to have as many people in a manufacturing environment. I think that's an obvious one. But it's tricky. I mean, it's tricky if you're set up in a way that has people very close proximity and you don't want to have that, and you can't automate a solution right away. You have to be very, very creative. That's for sure. There's no easy answer to that in a manufacturing setting.
Great. So please keep the questions coming. Fantastic question and answer session that we've got so far. Just while we're waiting for the next one, I know we collected a couple ahead of time as well, Michael. So one question for you, just around the strategies that you're presenting, and sort of this alphabet soup that we hear on the news all the time. We talk about U-shaped recoveries and V-shaped recoveries and W sort of scenarios and so forth. Any just as you're thinking about how to approach this, or L-shaped recovery, and some of the different ways in which people have sort of talked about this. How would the strategies that you're talking about be influenced by those different types of scenarios, and then how do you game plan for the different scenarios that are out there, especially given all the uncertainty that we have right now?
Right. And the truth is, nobody knows which one of those scenarios is actually going to happen. We just don't know. It's all unfolding in front of us, which is interesting because the traditional planning process is really around based on prediction. You're trying to predict the future and then plan for that prediction. We can't predict what's going to happen, but it doesn't mean we can't plan for it. So I think one of the really, really useful exercises at the moment for companies to go through is scenario planning, which is looking at potential futures that are plausible and challenging. So you're not trying to accurately predict the future. You're trying to generate a set of scenarios that are plausible but challenging, and then imagine how your organization will compete and win in those particular scenarios. And if you look at 3 or 4 different scenarios, and you look at how you would compete in those 3 or 4 different scenarios, what you might find is that actually there's some common responses that you would do across any of them. And if that's the case, you should be doing those things, because you're already figuring out whatever happens, these are things that we need to do. You also might, going through a process like this, it forces you to think about things you don't normally think about, eventualities, situations, scenarios that you don't normally think about. And sometimes you get really, really creative solutions coming out of an exercise like that. So I would say, in the absence of the ability to accurately forecast, I think scenario planning is a great tool to think about how you compete into the future. And Adam, let me just, as people are thinking about the questions, I've got a question for you. Not just you, Adam, everybody can think about it. So I had a conversation yesterday with a senior leader within a food and beverage company. And they're one of the in-betweener companies. And what they're finding is that certain types of their product categories and their food and beverage they cannot keep up with demand. But others are not selling very well at all. So I'm going to give you two categories. I want you to try and guess which one is doing really well, that they can't meet demand, and which one is not selling at all. So the two categories, they're both food categories. The first one is staple foods, like soup, like tomato paste, like pasta, flour, that type of thing. And the other one is more exotic foods, foods coming from different parts of the world. So the more exotic category of food. Now, which one do you think is selling really well, and which one do you think is not selling well at all?
I would imagine, I think it might be a trick question, but I imagine it's the staples that are selling really well, and the exotic food are the ones that are not.
You think so? Oh, it turns out that you're right. That in fact, what's selling really well is the staple foods. As people are at home in home confinement, they're buying more really comfort type foods. And the more exotic foods are really not selling that well at all. So it's kind of an interesting psychological factor there that, when people have the opportunity, I guess they're home, they can experiment. They're not experimenting.
They're not. Yep. Interesting.
Not at all.
Yep.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. So I've got a couple more questions. One from Catherine.
Okay.
If you had an opportunity to redeploy half of your human capital to do anything to support your business for a week, how would you use that time? Upskilling, intense focus on new market development. Sort of just interested. In any thoughts you have, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer the question from my own point of view. I'm in the business of executive education. That if I had a chance to redeploy the people who work in my organization, it would be all towards building capability to deliver content online. So it's the technology to do it, the skills to facilitate it, the content that goes on it. Experimenting, getting people involved because for sure in the space of executive education, face-to-face is not dead. People are going to come back into the classroom, but not all of them. Not all of them. So we're just redesigning a lot of our programs now to go from fully face-to-face to kind of a blended or fully online. So I would be, and in fact, that's what we're doing. We're allocating most of our resources to try and build that capability.
Yep. Terrific. So, and this is, I guess this one is sort of more in the challenging kind of department. This one's from Bill, and kind of, getting to, again, some of the difficulties in terms of bringing some, types of services, kind of online. He's got a commercial maintenance business. So how can I adjust my commercial maintenance business with the new work from home environment? Any kind of, quick thoughts there, but definitely one where, sort of challenging, to kind of think about how that could be improved.
So Bill, I mean, it's a great question. I feel for you. I'm not an expert in the commercial maintenance business. If I were to give you a specific answer, it would be just off the top of my head. So, I'm not going to attempt to try and tell you to be an expert in your business and tell you what to do. But I would say that I was kind of inspired by the example I gave about the hair cutting So there's all these hairstylists and barbers sitting doing nothing. There's all these people at home with hair growing like this. I don't know if anybody, if you could just wave your hand if you're on this webinar and you think your hair is too long. So this idea of getting the capability to walk people through their own solutions, I see that happening more and more. If it's too technical, it's not possible, but perhaps there is an option to provide service rather than having to physically go somewhere, to actually do it some sort of technology mediated format, if that's possible. But Bill, I'm sorry, my friend, I don't have a great answer for you for that specific question.
Great. I think Bill's question really demonstrates, how challenging the times are, and how much we're all having to adjust and sort of in this environment. Well, thank you very much. We are at time, Michael, and it was a fantastic presentation. I learned a ton. There was a lot of great ideas, a lot of great inspiration, coming out of this. Just want to conclude by again, thanking Michael, but then also noting that you can find much more at our website, execonline.com/virtual uncertainty. You will be able to find recordings of this presentation, as well as the webinars to come, and looking forward to seeing you again on a future webinar. So thank you again, Michael, and all of those who participated.
Thanks, everybody, and best of luck responding to this crazy crisis.
Good luck.